So welcome to I think that's our seventh Tableau user group support related since we back since last year. I think 7 or 8.
Give or
I
take.
can't. Yeah, somewhere there. So I think that's the Sydney AFL Stadium. Call me if I'm wrong. I'm based in Brisbane, but I'm pretty sure that's the. Looking at the color, maybe Jacob, looks like
It's very red and white, so yeah, probably.
could be, yeah. So Sydney AFL team. So that spot tag is brought to you by Steve, Ryan, myself. And I guess the purpose of that sport talk is to bring people that love sport either as a profession or many others that just love visiting sport-related data sets. So I think Steve, Ryan, and Moses, you work in the sports field, but I don't. I just love sport visiting. So I think that's the value of that kind of talk is we bring a very mix of experience and skills, and we just love talking about sports analytics. So today we've got two amazing members of the community, Jacob, who's based in Sydney, and Jeff, New Zealand. We're lucky that Jeff was sick this week, so we're lucky that Jeff can make it. Thanks, Jeff, for making the time. So Jacob will talk about his F1 journey viz, and Jeff would dive into an amazing dashboard that his team created. That's very, very rich, very rich. Jacob is based in Sydney, Australia. Your favorite sport is Formula 1 and rugby league. And favorite athlete, any F1 drivers. I think that was my introduction. I'll do the same with Jeff later, but Jeff is based in New Zealand, Christchurch. So over to you, Jacob.
Cool.
If you have questions, maybe I don't know where you want to run. Maybe we keep the questions for after the presentation when you finish your presentation.
Yeah,
might be easier.
I hadn't really planned for them to come up in between.
I'll put them in the chat and we'll review later. So
we'll see.
Over to you.
Hello and welcome. My presentation today is a data-driven journey in F1, quite literally. We'll dive into how I visualize the race from round 2 of the 2025 FIA Formula 1 World Championship held in China within Tableau. I'll cover where the idea came from, take a deep dive into the data sources and final model, as well as the final build in Tableau, which, as is on trend lately, involves map layers. Also, many of the slides have world circuits on them, thanks to the presentation theme that I found, so feel free to shout out the name of each circuit in chat when you spot them. There's no prizes, just bragging rights if you get them correct. Unfortunately, not every slide has a unique circuit though, just depends on which slide layout I used. Firstly, a little about me. Starting with my career, originally thought I was heading down a technical IT path after studying network engineering. But after I got an early contact center role within an outsourcing company, I ended up falling into a data role in my time there. That's led to where I am today. In my spare time, when I'm not doing data related things personally and professionally, doing typical family stuff with my wife, kids, and puppy. And you'll also find me playing a lot of guitar. Recently added a 7-string to my collection that I've got, playing video games and going to the gym. I've been using Tableau for quite a long time now, around 12 years experience, and in recent years have become more involved with the DataFam community. I'm also proud to say that as of last week, I've been announced as a Tableau ambassador for the first time. Just to round out my intro, as I'm sure most here will appreciate it, here's my puppy, Charlie, hanging out with Bluey and Bingo at our local hammer barn on the weekend. All right, here's a snapshot of my sports-based visualizations to date, 3 based on Formula 1 and 1 data story about Australian athlete Jessica Fox and her journey to winning K1 gold in Paris Olympics. And that one in particular was recognized as a Viz of the Day last year as well. Now, part of my presentation today focuses on idea generation, something I wrote a blog post on a couple of months ago, which you can access via the QR code on the screen, or you can find at my blog, datavizdiary.com. Before we get into the detail about my feature dashboard, here's a quick example of where my curiosity has led to creation. Earlier this year, I was looking to learn more about map layers within Tableau, and I was watching Formula 1 and saw a visualization similar to what you see on the left. which is part of the TV broadcast, and it animates through the entire grid, showing where each driver qualified, what position they would start the race. I got thinking to how to visualize this in a similar way in Tableau, and that resulted in that visual that you see on the right-hand side. Now I'm going to show the end result first. I feel like, yep. So I'll show the end result first, which I think will help make it easier to understand how all the elements I talked through today came together. So this is my final viz that I created in Tableau. I've recorded this. It's actually playing via Tableau desktop itself. One annoying thing with desktop is that those labels flash on and off for each page transition that happens, but that doesn't actually happen on the web. So you see there, it's just playing through the race, showing what happens lap for lap as each driver crosses the finish line. Different things appear there, like their lap times, whether it's a fastest lap, a personal best, when they enter and exit the pits, and so on. Now, that initial idea for the viz was sparked by this race playthrough by F1 Visualized. Interestingly, I had seen these visualizations numerous times before on YouTube. While I found them interesting, I hadn't thought about creating it within Tableau. Also, even though this visualization was inspiration for my final viz, I actually didn't reference it once I started to build. I just wanted to try and obviously there's ideas that I remembered and took from there, but I tried to just do my own thing in a way. So yeah, this is just the race playing through. One thing about this one, it seems as though as things happen within the lap, changes are happening. But my one, due to the data that I've got, it's just what happens each individual lap, kind of at the end of that lap. So it wasn't until a discussion occurred within an APAC WhatsApp group that I pursued this as a project. My memory might not be 100% accurate, but I believe Chris McClellan, who's here, shared that F1 visualized video from my prior slide in that chat. And he, Heather Cox, and myself, and possibly a couple of others started talking through the possibilities of building it within Tableau. As a solution, my mind went straight towards the bar chart visualization, like what you see on the right-hand side there. I thought that the technique and how that comes together would probably work for the end viz. But for some reason, we all thought that the pages play controls don't render in the Tableau web browser. So yeah, we just had in our mind that pages weren't going to work. So this led to some initial prototyping, which I also didn't think that this would work either, but I explored it anyway. Since we apparently couldn't use the play through pages in a web browser, I was looking at animations within Tableau, but being unable to chain all the animations together to represent all the laps of a 56 lap race without clicking that many times, that didn't go anywhere. Sometime later, I was doing some research on Formula One visualizations on Tableau Public and had an aha moment. I saw this visualization from Mateusz play with the pages play controls actually visible. And I don't really know why I didn't test it for myself earlier, but after seeing this, I went back to our WhatsApp chat and reported my discovery. So that led me to going back into prototyping. I'll show here. So Chris McClellan gave me some data initially, which I think came from the FIA Formula One website. They kind of run the show and all the regulations and everything there. And that helped me get started helping to plot driver positions for each lap of the race. I'll open in Tableau here. This was the early prototype. If I bring the driver number in there and just reset this and hit play, you'll see there that as each lap progresses, changes are happening between how far away each driver is from the leader of the race. But there were some issues with the data, just with that missing gaps to leader when drivers pit, And there's also no kind of lap 0 to represent the start of the race, and also an end of race summary. Also, this prototype doesn't utilize map layers at all, but I did plan to use them in my final build for things like ranking indicators, team color markers, the current tire choice, and more. Okay, so after determining that it's possible, I went on the hunt for data. There are quite a few sources out there for Formula One data, but the two that I ended up using for this were official timing documents from the FIA official website and also the Open F1 API. Let's go through the data model now, and showing examples of those, I guess, reports and data extracts that I used. Here's the FIA race lap analysis. So this tells me the local time each driver crossed the finish line to complete lap 1. And it also shows me each subsequent lap time following that. And it also gave me an indicator of when each driver entered the pits. And you can also see that the lap after, so when they did their pit out lap, is also compromised in comparison to consistent lap times there as well. So recording both the pit in and the pit out is a nice thing to put on the final viz itself. Then I also use this race lap chart. So this one tells me for each lap of the race and each driver number, what position they were in throughout the race. Then on the Open F1 API website, so here I used two API endpoints. I used the stints endpoint, which gave me the tire compound each driver was on throughout the race. In the regulations for a typical race, drivers need to use 2 different compounds. And so that means that each driver needs to pit at least once, hence why that pit indicator is also really important. I also use the driver API endpoint here, which gives me information like the driver's name and so on. And that I was able to link to the FIA data because the FIA data has driver numbers. Now, it would have been relatively straightforward to build these API tables manually just by looking at different references and so on. But I wasn't really in a rush for the project, so I use this as an opportunity to explore getting data from APIs. I fumbled my way through it a little bit, but used Postman for the API calls and returned the output as CSVs. Now, looking at the model itself, I ended up putting everything together just in Excel, so it was relatively straightforward for me. You can see here, this is the race lap chart from FIA, just put into Tableau. I transposed those positions, and that ended up helping me build this final race output table. So over here, we've got one row for each driver for each lap of the race. We've also got a 0 lap, which is basically helps generate the starting grid at the very beginning. And I've also got a lap 999, which is a final status of that. And that's useful for indicating how many points the driver earns in the championship for completing that race. And for this one in particular, it was also useful because I could label the drivers that ended up disqualified from that race. Poor Ferrari. Yeah, so we've got the lap here, then I've got the lap times for each lap. Obviously, the 0 lap doesn't have a lap time. I also recorded the time of day. So based on that initial, when they crossed the finish line for that first lap, which had the time of day, I was then able to use the lap time to then calculate the time of day for each subsequent lap. In here, I've got all the different statuses, which you can see. I'm going to show all the different statuses there. I've also got, the tire compound. So this driver number 1, it's Max Verstappen. He was on the medium tire for the first 13 laps of the race, and then changed to the hard compound after that. I've also got the rank for each lap here. So before he went into the pits, he was in 6th. Then when he came out, he was in 11th. And then obviously as he either overtook drivers on the track or other drivers pitted. He's then moved back up to 6th place to later where he finished. Now in here, I've got the time of day for rank 1 as well. And so that helps me identify the gap to rank 1. And that's then what I end up using on my x-axis for the map layers visualization. There, so this is basically my x coordinate. And then I've just repeated, this is just basically what's in column G. But I've just repeated it and labeled it as Y rank. So that will give me the vertical positioning on the chart as well. Now, the last thing that I wanted to highlight lap times and then color them based on whether people are getting personal best or fastest laps and so on. So I needed to generate a status for that. So here, I have determined what the overall fastest lap is so far based on the lap of that race. And then I've also determined the driver's own fastest lap so far. And then I'm using those in combination to determine personal bests and fastest laps and so on. And that's it. That's how that comes together. Moving on to the Tableau build itself now. So here is Tableau desktop. First, I'll go to the data source tab. And when this loads, yeah, you'll see that this is pretty straightforward. So it's that race detail output table that I had in Excel. And then I've also got the driver reference table. I didn't show that in the Excel, but it's just what came out of that API endpoint from OpenF1. And I've just got a join relationship here between the driver number in the two tables. On the dashboard itself, it's only 4 worksheets. And for the main viz, I've ended up using 2. First, though, I've got a little info hover just to communicate what the dashboard is about, how it came about. Then I've also got a lap status here. So at the moment, it just says that this is a starting grid, but as the race progresses, if I go to there, you can see it shows that we're now looking at lap 25 of 56. We go to the end, then we've got the final classification. And then I've got 2 charts here. So one is the primary chart, which is it's all of the vehicles, all the car shapes, the tire compound indicator, all the status labels, and things like the lap times as well. Then I've got a secondary chart, and that secondary chart are the labels for the rankings and the driver names. And the reason I did have them together originally, but the reason I separated them was because I didn't want the names to animate. So when it plays through, there's animated transitions so that these movements happen smoothly. But the names, when they animated and they crossed each other, it got really confusing and difficult to follow, even though the animation is a path. So I separated those out and specifically turned off the animation for that secondary sheet. With my layout, I'm a fan of containers, so I do have the primary chart just floating on top, but then everything behind it is all containerized. So I've got my header, I've got my subheader with elements within. I've got a body container, and then in here I've got my body header and controls. So that's the play buttons, the lap indicator, and a little title here. Then I've got the secondary chart behind that primary chart there. And then I've actually got a blank element here because the primary chart is the one that has this axis down the bottom, but I don't have the axis visible for the primary for the secondary chart because the overlapping of the labels makes it a little bit difficult to read. So I've turned those off and used a blank just to space that down. And then I've got the legend below as well. And then finally a footer. Now with the playback control, so I've positioned them up here just to the top right, and put a little indicator to say, hey, here is where you do playback. In Tableau Desktop, as most are probably aware, you do get the slow, normal, and fast speed controls, but unfortunately you can't control that within Tableau Public on the web, so you're just limited to the one speed that it shows. Going through the sheets here, so I'll go to the secondary chart first, and is set the background color to black so you can see it. And so you can see here, it's literally just the ranking indicators and driver indicators. So I've got two mark layers to do that. And for anyone who's not sure about map layers or who hasn't seen it before, basically by using two different X and Y coordinates, you're able to plot things wherever you want on a canvas. So if I have a look at my ranking square here, so that's the square shape plus a label. I'm using my point rank calculation from the left-hand side. So if I open that and go to edit, you can see that my make point is using the Y rank to generate my vertical element there. And then I've hard coded 155 for my x-axis. And that, if I just show the header, that works because I have manually set my axis range, because in this particular race, no driver ended up more than, say, 120 to 130 seconds behind the leader. And so just based on this race specifically, 155 is a nice spot for me to place these here. Now, also note, this is going in a positive direction this way. So I did reverse that axis. And the reason for that is because the gap to leader is always a positive number in my data set. So I just needed to flip that around just to make sure that my leading driver is always in the top right of the visual. Looking at driver details, it's basically the same as the other one. So I'm using point rank driver. And you can see I'm using Y rank, but for this, instead of 155, I'm using a point of 152, which places it just to the right-hand side of the rank number there. This sheet as well as well as the primary sheet, they both have lap on pages, and that syncs those two sheets up because I'm using the exact same dimension on my pages shelf. So it's only using the one play controls to play through. Let's hide that, and I'll just set this back to none. And then let's have a look at the primary sheet. This one's a bit more complicated because there's a lot more layers on there. Setting the background to black so that you can see it. You'll know that this one, it does also have an indicator for each team color here. And that, if I look at the dashboard, sorry, let's change this back here to none. See how this is formatted in a very particular way. That's based on the TV graphics themselves. So you can see here, I've kind of mimicked the look and the feel of that in my viz. So that's where that inspiration came from and why I've done it that way. Back on that primary chart, again, change that color back. Now everything over on this side centers around the position of the car. The center point of the car shape is what represents the actual gap to leader. So if you followed this down, that would be about that 13-second mark for how far behind Leclerc is from Oscar in front. And then everything else is based on that. So if I look at the car and look at point car, you can see that it's just using the Y rank in the X gap to leader straight from the data source that I've built. if we look at lap status, which is using point status, go to edit. I'm making some adjustments based on whether there's a lap time visible. And so with this one, the lap time is exists. So what that will do is push the status up 0.2. And what that results in is this pit out lap status moves down 0.2 from the center of the vehicle. And then I'm also subtracting 3.5, which is what pushes that point for the status to the right-hand side. So in here, I just did a bunch of testing, I suppose. Like if I was to change this to 5, it's going to push it further to the right. So putting that back in place. And then because I'm doing this is null calculation here, basically what that means is if I get to the end of the race, when there's no lap time status, it results in the this particular status appearing right in the middle. So it just spaces things nicely in the end. Lap time works the same way as lap status. So when there's no status, it will put the lap time in the middle. But then when there is a status, it will push it up so that it sits nicely and synchronized together. Then for my tire indicator, so yellow means medium tire compound. White means that it's a hard tire compound. And so I've used 3 circle shapes here overlaid on each other just to mimic what a tire kind of looks like in the race. And then finally, I've got my team bar here on the left-hand side. Cool. I'm running a bit short on time, so that's that's how that all comes together. I'll progress now I've got a few map layers tips as well. I think early on, I think most people are past this now, but early on, people would wash out the background when creating a map layer visualization. So if I pop this in, and then the map will show up, I would go up here to maps and change it to none. And then the good thing about that is that you're able to show the header, which can help with positioning things when you're creating make point calculations later. But then what you'll find is when you've changed it to none, you can't add, when you've only got one layer on there, you can't add a secondary layer. So if that happens, what people were doing was using a dummy point initially and then adding everything after that. But if that does happen, you can just change this back. Then you're able to add another map layer, and then you can go back and turn the map layers off. And then you're able to add more and more map layers after that. I'd also recommend to rename your layers just to make things easier to follow, which is what I'd done. So in there, you click the drop down and rename it. But then it can be difficult to remember which make point calculation is used for each layer. So just have a look at the collect field here and see which one you're using. So point lap time, and then you're able to easily reference that. And my last tip is just to remember that X and Y coordinates are based on longitude and latitude min-max values. Even though we've turned the map off, you still have a limit of -180 to 180 degrees for latitude, for longitude, and -90 to 90 degrees for latitude. So if your X and Y coordinates need to be something outside that range, you're going to have to convert your data to reduce it to be within range. So potentially normalize it to make all of your values span between 0 and 1 or something like that. And that's it. That's the end. Thank you.
Jacob, awesome. Do we have any quick question for Jacob? There's lots to it. I didn't realize that was so intensive to build this that way. So thanks a lot. You guys have any question for Jacob? I just made everyone presenter, so maybe a quick one. Otherwise, we'll wait until the end.
Yeah.
No. Thanks for the tips as well, Jacob. I feel they're really useful.
Cool. No worries. Thank you.
While I'm waiting for potential questions, and next speaker, Jeff. Jeff, oh, you feel better? Jeff was sick this week. So Jeff works for a company called Parallel 42. You're based in Christchurch, New Zealand. Your favorite sport is F1, football, and rugby. Football as European soccer, I suspect.
That's right.
Yeah, and favorite athlete, you should say, who's that player? Zidane. Oh, sorry, Leon Messi and Max Verstappen. Over to you, Mike.
I put Max in there just to wind up Jacob, to be honest.
And then I told you I don't care. I like
and
Max.
then you didn't mind.
Over to you, Jeff.
He is the best.
I was born in Holland.
There's no downing it. He's the best.
He's a solid third this year, right? So he's not too much of a threat. So hopefully Oscar can pull one over Lando, but maybe the Brits watching later might not agree with it either, to be honest.
Into politics with Formula One teams.
That's right. Okay, I'll share my screen and just
yeah, we can see
it. Yeah, nice.
Cool.
So thanks, Fred, for inviting me to share this session, and I've been personally visiting sports data for various reasons, but nice to see that there's a tug related around sports visualizations, professionally and personally, and happy to share some of the work that we've been doing with a professional rugby club here in New Zealand. A bit about myself to start with is, I live in Christchurch, New Zealand, lovely spot, mostly away from the hustle and bustle of the world, so I don't mind that. The negative is that all football Formula One is typically on at 2 a.m, so it's a bit hard to watch live when most sport is in Europe that I like, but nonetheless, I still follow as much as I can. My Tableau credentials are not quite as impressive as Jacob's. I'm not an ambassador, and I haven't had a visit of the day, but I am an enthusiast. So I actually worked at Tableau for a short time when I was in London. I've led the tug in Christchurch for some time pre-COVID. I've attended a few Tableau conferences, and more recently with the Visit Sydney events being held, I first went as an attendee, and I returned this year as a presenter and presented this content today, and just happy to make it more visible to more people around sports analytics. As I said, personally visiting, I use data to help decide my children's names. My wife was a teacher and wanted names that weren't too common but weren't too crazy, and so we used publicly available data here in New Zealand when we knew we were having a boy to understand the popularity of certain names and trends over time, and it actually did genuinely help us name a baby. And I've shared this with a few people who have also used it, so it's had more reach than just my own children. In the past, Christchurch earthquakes were a big event for us, and so testing new Tableau functions has always been something that's interesting to me. So several years ago, when the first spatial calc started to come out around distance, I created a really interesting sort of topical viz for myself around selecting a location anywhere in New Zealand and being able to see relative to my location, how exposed was I to strong earthquakes. And you can see in the top right hand corner that yes, I certainly was impacted by some large earthquakes. Turning to sports visualizations, this is as recently as a few months ago, looking at the British and Irish Lions tour to Australia. It was just exploring the squad selections, which nations were represented in which positions, and like Jacob, doing a bit of custom plotting for some spatial coordinates, and being able to plot a rugby team on a field, for example. Really interesting to see that the Irish forward pack was sort of historically, massively represented this year compared to all previous tours since the 70s. The English had very average representation against the historical squads, and then heading down to the Welsh, unprecedented levels of underrepresentation, reflecting their sort of last 2-3 years of international challenges, and similarly with Ireland doing so well globally, it makes sense that their squads were strongly represented. I've also done final previews of Super Rugby matches here, looking at historic results between the two finalists at a team level, at a player level, playing with new types of visualizations, and the intention here was to the gap in the bar was the distance of the winning margin, and then the higher the circle, the more points that were scored. So you can have low scoring tight matches, and you can have high scoring tight matches. Just having some fun with Tableau. I've got some unpublished vizzes as well around cricket analysis, comparing Ross Taylor broke a few records for us internationally before his retirement, and just comparing his achievements against others. Was an interesting personal project, and that's actually an unpublished viz, but I just purely did it for my own sake. And then a lot of us play Fantasy Premier League, and in our office we have a league where we have weekly Manager of the Week awards and things like that. So I visualize all the Fantasy Premier League data from our pool, and it's just a fun way to track how we're doing week on week against each other and things like that. So all sorts of different reasons or ways I'm using Tableau with sports data. Our company is called Parallel 42, and it's a bit of a nerdy nod to the 42nd latitude crossing through the South Island of New Zealand. So that's a bit where that came from. And then professionally, whilst we work with all sorts of different industries and clients, just a really interesting use case was with the Crusaders, and the Crusaders play professionally in the Super Rugby competition here in the Southern Hemisphere, or more specifically Australia and New Zealand now. Historically, who are the Crusaders? If you're not aware, they are sort of the winningest team in Super Rugby, including some early title success to really set a standard of being one of the top teams in the competition. And then more recently, they've won 8 out of the last 9 seasons, which is unheard of, including 7 in a row. And this is again me just looking at Super Rugby over time. More and more teams participated. They're consistently changing the competition format, and the number of the teams that are included. You had South Africa leave the competition at some point. So it's an ever-changing competition format, but the consistency that the Crusaders show winning championships is pretty remarkable. And so to work with them is a bit of a privilege, and it sort of led into this these templates that we built in Tableau to help other clubs or anyone using rugby data to basically just go a lot faster, right? So the first problem a lot of analysts have in these professional clubs is they're time poor. So you've got in any given week, you've got travel considerations. You're reviewing last week's match to see what you did well and did you execute a game plan, and you're also preparing for the upcoming opponent. Yeah, and traveling all in the space of 7 days, so it's very intense. These analysts are not necessarily data experts. They've generally got a very good knowledge of the game of rugby itself. They'll potentially have a specialization in video analysis as well. And that third level of data analytics, there's games being coded by companies in the UK and just capturing all sorts of different match events and spitting out these long tables of events. But to have the skill set to turn that into something that's actually meaningful and usable is certainly not what someone at a specific club would have. And then on top of that, the budgets to spend that time or effort in creating something just for them doesn't make sense. Certainly a high contrast to things like football, where they've got large analytics departments. So existing solutions are static and visually average. If we're being nice, you don't see much color contrast here, and you don't get too excited looking at the numbers. And that's fine. It does a job, but with no interactivity, it's hard to personalize this type of content. And it's even hard to move between matches. You've got to close a PDF, go to another match, download a PDF and open that. And so if you're trying to move between matches and seasons and competitions, it's all a bit tricky. other example of what we've seen in the past around some match analysis. But we really wanted to lift the standard of what you can see and do. So the 3 key areas that we focused on was analysing a single rugby match, and I'll show you that in a second. The second was then analysing a season-long campaign, so you can see trends over time. And then the third sort of key area for these rugby clubs is around recruitment and player identification, talent. And so that's the third focus. And depending on how I go for time, Fred, let me know. I'll show you recruitment as well. So if I open up a match report, this is what our template looks like. And yeah, the key idea is that we can have any number of competitions in here, any number of seasons, and basically you've got every single match available to you. So you can look at your own results very quickly, you can look at your opposition results, and you can even head overseas and virtually look at match results in competitions that games you haven't even watched, but you still want to get a really good understanding of what happened in that match. So if we start here in Super Rugby, let's say we are, and we can be any of these teams, or we can focus on any of these teams. But if we focus on the Blues, this is their list of fixtures, and we can see here that if we went to the very first match of the year, we could load that information, and instead of looking at spreadsheets and tables, we start to see some highly visual results, which we like. These key head-to-head statistics, we're trying to visualize and show dominance in certain areas very quickly, and you can see there's some dominance here if you're the Blues. A solid match summary along the top, score line. This concept of key battles is basically head-to-head analysis of that metric. So if the Blues had decided for this particular match that carrying the ball more than their opposition was a path to victory, we would see that they actually didn't achieve that goal. If another path to victory was kicking more than the opposition, you can see that they well and truly won that statistic. And so it's up to teams to decide what is a key battle for them, and so they can come in here and pick anything, to be honest, and close it. And these key battles just get displayed along the top. So we don't want to pretend that we know what their key strategies are. But we just want to give those teams the chance to pick those themselves and very quickly see did they win in certain areas of the match. Then the match statistics, a bit more detail, but again visually showing that the Blues dominated, particularly around 22-meter entries, successes, and how many points they scored every time they entered the 22. So that was a really good area for them. Perhaps not so much around. They lost a few scrums, so they only won 78% of their scrums, and they set far less rucks. So perhaps the Drua had a bit more of a running game. And then the real story of the match is over on the right-hand side. This is the scoreline difference over time. And so you can see that the Blues established an early lead. The opposition got a yellow card just before half-time, and the Blues capitalised on that. And then likewise, when they got a yellow card, the Drua were able to score some points, and then basically the second half is just the Blues maintaining and defending a lead that they've already established. And so you get this really quick visual overview of a match straight away. And then it can be quite interesting when you go to a match that's got a bit more happening in terms of fluctuation. So that was the Blues at home. This is now the Blues away. And so we're now the Blues developed an early lead. The Reds came absolutely storming back in the second half, only for the Blues to sort of nip it right at the end of the match and win the game. And so you get a really good story just from that visual around what's happened in the match. One of the key ideas that we had right from the start is that when you're moving between matches, just cognitively, when you're a home team, you're in black, and when you're an away team, you become the orange team. And if I'm analysing 3 or 4 matches in a row, I don't necessarily want to have to think about was I home and away and what colour was I. So if we want the Blues to not be sort of constantly switching between are we home or away, we can actually set them up to be what we call a focus team. And what that does is basically flips all their away games and all metrics and all head-to-head battles, and turns them into the focus team. And therefore, if you're the Blues quickly scanning through 6 or 7 different matches, you're always black, you're always on the left, and you're able to quickly then understand that actually that was us building that lead early on. It was the opposition that came back strongly, and we won the match at the end. So we've had really good feedback on those types of adoption nice to haves that have gone above and beyond just presenting the data as it stands raw. And yeah, to take that away from analysts to think about and players and coaches, right? There's more than just the analyst looking at this information. Just really helps with consistent delivery of information and analysis. And then that's purely just the key stats. And then you go into sort of concepts that we've developed around momentum. So you could look at statistically, where was the ball on the pitch throughout the match, and what events helped to gain or stop momentum. I'm going quite quickly here, but just to show you some key concepts. Performance scores. So we have a scoring system around player performance, which players had the most impact on a match. And so for the Blues, they won the match. They had a prop had a particularly good game for them. Most of the forward pack and the back line had a solid match, and then you had a few lower scorers. And that scoring system is based on sort of the key attributes of that position to help highlight whether they did their core job well or not. And you can see this hook has been, we talked about it earlier, they lost a few lineouts and things like that. So perhaps that's one of the reasons why the hooker has been scored low compared to the Queensland counterpart. And likewise, even on a losing team, you can still score well. And Tim Ryan, in this case, if we go back to the match, he scores, I think, 3 tries, right? So he scores 1, 2, 3, yeah. So he's got a hat trick in the second half, and so for a winger, that's part of their core role, is to finish and score tries. So that would have been a contributor to that score. Heading into the final for the Blues, this is the 2024 season. This sort of blowout score was not predicted. It was predicted to be quite a close match. And if you wanted to understand how did the final play out, again, you'd see it very quickly. Very dominant across almost all statistics. Just built a lead and never lost it. So they just continued to build and build. A yellow card to the opposition, helps reinforce their position, but they just consistently scored throughout the whole match, and were able to win the final. Something interesting that I spotted in this particular match, when you look at the kicking statistics, was that if you know rugby, first fives typically don't get too creative and in terms of their kicking styles, but Damien McKenzie, who's one of the All Blacks first fives, in a losing effort was certainly trying a bit of everything to turn the match fortunes around. Different kick types on different parts of the pitch, just trying to steer his team and turn the result around, but to no avail. I'll switch to a longer term view. So that's at the match level, right? And you can move between matches as much as you like. The next level of analysis is, okay, we won that particular match, or our opposition won a particular game, but what do they typically do well over a length of time against multiple teams and other opposition? So if I was the Blues and I was playing against the Brumbies perhaps, and I wanted to understand their previous season, I could go in and understand which games they won and lost. You can see they're strong at home and they're only winning half their games away. So there's definitely a weakness, a travel component to the Brumbies in 2023. And we can compare, sorry, I'll go back. We said we're the Blues, right? Let's just pretend we're the Blues. So we can scout the Brumbies as an opposition and compare them to us, the Blues, in this example, and sort of look at where are our similarities and differences amongst the entire competition. So we score a very similar amount of points. We score the same, a very similar amount of tries. we play completely differently in terms of how quickly we play. The Blues are a fast team. The Brumbies are a slower build-up team. And again, it goes right through, right? So the Brumbies will work their way into the 22, and when they get there, they convert pretty well in the context of the competition, whereas the Blues are almost wasteful. When you're at the bottom here, you're more wasteful of your opportunities of converting 22-meter entries into points, and that just keeps going. You really look for just similarities and differences across key metrics. And we can do that at something like a lineup level. You know, what are their lineups likely to be? How often do certain positions and players play? So that's minutes played against that player, and you can filter this down to certain oppositions and things. If you just want to look at how do the Brumbies play against New Zealand teams, for example. We've got lots of team level statistics that people can dive into, but it's all about giving that time back to the analyst and letting them work quite quickly through and explore the data through different lenses. To understand where there might be strengths and weaknesses of their own game as well as the opposition's game. Play styles is an interesting concept. Just looking at the different ratios between key events, and you can see here that the Brumbies in black are the highlighted team, right? They were the focus team we chose. They are towards the kicking end of teams in the competition, and then the Blues are more towards the ball carrying end of things. If you're familiar with Super Rugby, the Fiji and Drua always stand out. They have a very distinct play style, and they just love to run it from most areas in the pitch. So they definitely tend to kick less than everyone else. And you can see those outliers, right? If you only filtered to the Brumbies and filtered to the Blues, you'd lose the context of how these teams play similar to the competition. And I think this is more important, again, if you go and look at the French league or some of the Northern Hemisphere leagues and you're not so familiar with all the teams and you want to understand how the game's evolving, all this context of how these teams play and what does a successful team do will help people understand that. So that's the goal with all this sort of thing. And then I think with the Brumbies, something interesting I thought I found here was sort of the predictability of their lineouts depending on where they are on the pitch. So, for example, 90% of the time they use that this 4-man formation for defensive lineouts. So if I'm the Blues, I can plan and basically make an assumption that if we're trying to attack the Brumbies in their own defensive lineouts, let's do a training plan or look at some video around attacking these two formations because they're dominant, absolutely dominant. And yeah, if the Brumbies try some of these other lesser known formations, then that's fine. But we can certainly target what they're most likely to do in that scenario. I think that's all I've got for some examples of a match level detail versus sort of long-term competition analysis. How am I for time, Fred?
Just 1 minute left, but how much more content? Because you can spend another 5 minutes, or because that's super interesting.
Okay, I'll just run through a really brief sort of recruitment example then.
Yeah, that's a good one. This is the one that you.
Yeah, so this is quite different again, and this is basically when teams are succession planning. So maybe they've got an older player that's retiring, and they want to replace with a similar style of player. The other option is that they want a completely different style of player to perhaps what they've already got in the team. So if I am any team, I can basically say that I want to look at all the players in that position in that competition, and I want to sort of form a profile and build a profile around how someone plays. So this is maybe a if I take line breaks, halfback running doesn't often get line breaks, but if we wanted a running halfback that got us across the gain line, I would put something like a high weighting towards that statistic, and that's going to help score them higher than like if I said line breaks are not important at all. I want a more predictable halfback, you'll see that the scores just slowly adjust. And if I change another metric, I've got workload very high. If I change that weighting, you see the scores just move around a bit, and you basically can find a player profile, a play style that you're trying to find, and then look at either this competition, or you can go again overseas and see who's playing overseas that fits this profile that we could recruit to come and play for our team. And then so once we've got something like this in place, we could see that for the Blues, as much as they were I'll just highlight them first. So you first see that the Blues have this player, Christie, who has played the most minutes, but he actually scores the lowest based on this profile that we've built. So if we want to complement him, maybe we want a substitute that makes a lot more impact, so he can play most of the match, and then we want to come, our substitutes basically have the same sort of profile, and so it's not exactly game breaking, or it's going to change the style of a game, because we've got three players that are actually relatively similar in how they play. But what we can identify is other players that do have a bit of a contrast in their play style. And so what we'd do is take our main halfback, for example, and we'd set them as player one. I'm not familiar with many of these players, but let's take a halfback from, I'll just take someone who's played a similar amount of minutes, Frank Lamani from the Drua. And then basically we can go head to head here and look at a much more statistical sort of comparison between the two players. So we first build the profile, and then we jump in here, and then straight away the first thing I notice is that this top right hand corner, Frank Lamani, dominates in ball carrying statistics compared to Finlay Christie. So Finlay Christie is not a ball runner, but then if you come down into defending, then Finlay Christie's got much stronger defensive statistics. So you've got a bit more defensive minded player against a much more attacking minded player. And the greys just mean we don't consider them to be statistically different enough to call it one way or the other. So something like pass percentage is 97% for Finlay Christie, 95 for Frank Lamani, close enough. So therefore, we're not going to assign who's better or worse at statistics that are very similar. But you can see, assisting breaks 2.4 assists per 80 minutes compared to less than 1 for Finlay Christie. So the idea being that the coloured scale is the player on the left hand side. So he's better at handling the ball without making mistakes and making less errors. He's better at making tackles, and so he's the solid bar, with the comparison player being the black stripe. And so you can see then that when we flip it around, Finlay Christie's weakness areas against this Frank Lamani are mainly around carries, and you can see that meters per carry, significantly different between the two. So that would be a big sort of differentiator that Frank Lamani might bring to the Blues should he be compared to Finlay Christie. So I'll leave it there, but those are three sort of quick overviews of how we're trying to help rugby clubs go much faster and very quickly compared to staring at tables and tables of data. And sort of the key thing that we had in mind, if I skip through to here, is something like this, is making sure that we're adding context to the data. So and like I showed, even that focus team switch, right? Sometimes if we're watching a lion documentary, if we're looking at the winning team, we're pretty excited that the lion has caught the antelope. But if you're the team if you're the antelope, those same statistics should reflect that you've got weaknesses and that you need to do stronger. And our reaction to the same statistic with the right context is completely different. So we're really trying to add context to everything we do. And then I had this last, I always love this sort of element of context too, is bringing together hopefully three key areas of rugby analytics, and helping clubs have a much tighter view of how they're performing on the field, all using Tableau.
Well done. It's amazing. Any question from, I think you got comments in the chat, but amazing talk, Jeff. I think that's the level of detail is really mind-blowing. That's really, really cool. And the fact that you can compare or different competitions as well, that's really amazing.
Yeah, that's a key one for them, right? Is to there's different reasons why they want to go and look overseas, but mostly around recruitment and play styles to try and innovate. I think a lot of people would actually end up looking at the Crusaders and trying to understand what they do so well and how can they reflect some of that in their own game and bring that back to the Northern Hemisphere, for example. Certainly beats opening and closing hundreds of PDFs whilst trying to find that information.
Any further questions? Thank Jeff and Jacob. I think different talks, but really amazing content. Thanks a lot. I've put gonna put in the chat as well the TUG link as well. Always looking for presenters. I know Steve is scoping out the next TUG with different folks. We try to alternate US time zone, European time zone, and APAC. But if you know someone or whatever, just put your name forward. I think it's always good to have that kind of mix of content and experience and skills. Steve, when's the next one again? It's not confirmed yet, but it's getting close.
Yeah, we are planning to do one early December. We're going to try and make it North American and Europe friendly for the time zone, but it's going to be soccer focused, biased because that's mostly my background in sports. But yeah, we'll have someone based in Seattle, and then I think Demola may be presenting one of his wonderful sports quizzes as well. I won't spoil which one it is, but yeah.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. Again, Jacob and Jeff, amazing. I know I saw Jeff's comment talk at Visit, but it's so rich that I think it's good. Now we got a recording, and then we can play that back because it's really amazing analysis and content. So
yeah, and happy to be contacted to talk through it in a bit more detail if people are interested as well.
No worries. Thanks everyone for joining, and then see you online at some stage.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you.
All the presenters, really appreciate it.